What's going on, guys? Dottz here, and today I'm bringing you my updated stamina Nightblade build for PvP in the Elder Scrolls Online Ascending Tide patch. So my stamblade really has not changed all that much from previous iterations, but obviously with a new patch, a new meta, and everything in the game now being hybridized, we have access to more things, and so obviously some alterations were needed to be made to the stamblade, just like all my other builds. But thankfully the core of this build has held up pretty much the same from past patches. I do feel like stamblade is a lot like Magsork in a lot of ways, where because it's just such a well-built class for PvP, that builds typically do last quite a long time on the classes. And like I said, thankfully that's the case here on the stamblade, since the things really haven't changed all that much from the previous patch. But like I do always say, guys, before my build videos, this is just what I like, what I use, and what works for me. If you want to make any alterations to this build for your personal preferences or run something else in your stamblade entirely, go right ahead. This is simply just me showcasing what's working for me and what I am finding success with. But without further ado, let's kick things off with our first set, and it's going to be a one-piece bonus, and that is going to be one piece of Lord Warden. So since I am using a mythic, I did have an open slot, and so I chose to go with a single piece of Lord Warden here for 1500 armor. This is something that I like to use on the stamblade just to give me a little bit of extra tankiness. When I was running this as either like a damage one piece or a sustain, I felt like I was just missing a little bit of extra just mitigation that I in certain situations I really did feel like I needed. And honestly, just getting this extra, like 2.5%-ish mitigation to me really did feel like it made a bit of a difference. I did personally notice it, and it just kind of gave me like a little bit of padding that I personally felt I needed for the build in terms of just my defense. And so the one piece Lord Warden just kind of helps give us a little bit of more staying power inside of combat. Now this build is very offensive in nature, so this is going to be one of the only defensive things you see on the build. So kicking off one of our first 5 pieces, that's going to be 5 pieces of Stygian, which gives us 2 lines of weapon damage, a line of pen, and when you leave sneak or invisibility while in combat, your weapon damage is increased by 356 for 15 seconds. So we still do run traditional cloak on this build, and so because of that, Stygian's going to get an absolutely high amount of value for us. So basically going to have like 100% uptime on this. On top of Stygian, we also are a stage 3 vampire on this build. It's going to be no surprise, I'm stage 3 vampire on I think almost all my builds this patch. And so we do not only use that for undeath to reduce our damage taken by 30% based on our missing health, but Stygian combines really well with strike from the shadows. So when you leave sneak, invisibility, or mist form, your weapon damage is increased by 300 for 6 seconds. So we're not only getting 356 from Stygian, we are getting an additional 300 from strike from the shadows. So this just gives us a lot of peak weapon damage coming out of stealth. I do apologize for my phone. And just giving us really, really high damage in our opening out of stealth, which is also going to be where we proc one of our other sets, and that is going to be 5 pieces of Stoons. So this gives us 2 lines of weapon damage, another line of pen. The 2 through 4 pieces for these sets are absolutely fantastic. And when you deal damage to an enemy who is off balance, let me mute my phone, I'm so sorry. When you deal damage to an enemy who is off balance, your physical and spell penetration is increased by 5100 for 10 seconds. Now when we come out of stealth with our surprise attack, we are going to be stunning the enemy from a flank, which is always going to be where we want to attack enemies from, and setting them off balance. And so we were setting off enemies off balance coming out of stealth, so Stoons will then proc and give us a huge boost to our penetration. So coming out of stealth, we're getting so much increased damage basically by just hitting someone with surprise attack. It's insane. And so Stoons is going to give us a lot of pen to allow us to penetrate through as much of our opponent's defenses as possible, making it more likely that we can kill them with a burst combo. Now our other one piece on the build is going to be a mythic, and that is going to be the Marken Ring of Majesty. So this is going to give us 200 weapon damage and 2300 armor. I absolutely love Marken. It's my favorite mythic in the game. It just gives you a really good balance of offense and defense, giving you boosts to your weapon damage as well as to your armor. To me, I notice that increased armor on all of my characters. Like, I seriously do notice it. I feel considerably tankier with this extra armor than without it. And then the extra weapon damage is just going to help us, offensively. by giving us more damage to work with, which is not only going to obviously help our damage, but it's going to help our healing as well. So Markin, definitely one of my favorite mythics in the game, just because of how well balanced it is. And then our back bar 2-piece for the build is going to be the Master's Perfected Bow. This is going to give us a line of weapon damage, and then it's going to increase our weapon damage against the targets afflicted by our poison arrow. So we do run poison injection on the back of the build, and so because of that, we get an additional 330 weapon damage when we actually have poison injection up on an opponent. So this is just another damage amp that we have in the build. This build is very, very, very offensive. And so I do personally feel that with the armor from Lord Warden and Markin, I feel like that's enough defense for me. On the Stamblade, I've typically always liked to play my Stamblade high mobility, high damage. And so Master's Perfected Bow just really plays into that kind of strategy and play style. We also have a weapon damage glyph back here to just give us another big boost to that weapon damage. Now, guys, moving into the weights and traits and everything, I believe I'm running a 2 heavy and 5 medium setup. This is just for increased duration on our armor buff, so that is going to be on Shadow Barrier. Casting a Shadow ability grants major resolve for 6 seconds, increasing your physical and spell resist by 59.48, and the duration is increased by 25% for each piece of heavy armor equipped. So I personally find that the 9 seconds on the Shadow abilities is just a little bit more usable than the 6, and so because of that, I do run 2 pieces of heavy for that reason. So you run it on the chest as reinforced and on the boots, and then I do run, like I said, 5 pieces of medium. We run 1 reinforced, I run 3 well fitted, and then 3 impen. We're going to be using triglyphs across the board here. We're going to do then here 2 robust on our jewelry and 1 swift. The swift piece is very, very, very important. You want to run at least 1 piece of swift. This just makes it a lot easier to stick to targets because I do not run a gap closer. So swift is very, 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 very big for the build. We do run 2 stamina recovery and 1 weapon damage. I then run a Nirnhone Stoons greatsword here. I have enough pen with Stoons and with my base pen that I felt like I could go for the Stoons Greatsword as Nirnhoned and just really, really, really increase that weapon damage. And then I also do run Escapist Poison, so this is going to immobilize our target and grant us Unstoppable for 2.4 seconds, and then also inflicts Hindrance on our target, granting us Major Expedition and reducing their movement speed by 40% for 3.5 seconds. I just found this really easy to, make it easier for us to stick to opponents, and so I really do like these Escapist Poisons here. And then, like I said earlier, on the back bar, we are running a Master's Perfected Bow. And I just wanted to mention that Stoons is going to be the front bar set here because it is our great sword, Master Perfected Bow on the back bar, and then Stygian will obviously be double barred. Now, guys, moving into our skills here. Our first skill is going to be Camo Hunter. So Camo Hunter is going to give us an increase to weapon damage passively through the Fighters Guild passives. On top of that, it's going to give us Major Savagery at all times, increasing our weapon crit, Minor Berserk when we hit from a flank, which will be in this build. And it also allows us to expose other Nightblades in stealth. It's just such a good ability. You get a lot of effective damage coming out of a singular skill slot here. I personally do like this as well more than the gap closer, more than ambush, just because I feel like the crit from this is super, super, super valuable. So I really do like Camo Hunter for those reasons. Our spammable is obviously going to be surprise attack, so this is going to apply the Sundered status effect, giving us a little bit more pen, going to give us some, obviously instant hit physical damage, and then this is going to obviously be our spammable main attack, so the stuns enemies when we hit them from a flank, sets them off balance, procs our Stoons, and is going to be also procking our armor buff as well. Just a very, very good skill for the Stamblade. Obviously hits incredibly hard when everything is all buffed up. And this is just, like I said, going to be the spammable for the build. Now, this one is a personal choice, and I will talk about this. I still run Relentless Focus. So this gives you, you focus your senses for a minute, increasing your weapon and spell damage by 60 with every light or heavy attack up to 5 times. While active, hitting an enemy with 5 light or heavy attacks, convert this to Assassin's Scourge, allowing you to fire the Spectral Bow for half cost that deals damage and heals you for 33% of the damage dealt if you are within melee range. So personally, the reason, this is a personal choice for me to run Relentless Focus. If you want to deal a bit more damage, you're going to want to run the other morph here. You're going to want to run Merciless Resolve, the Magicka morph. But the reason that I personally still use the Stamina morph is that I cloak a lot on this build. Even though my magicka pool, it's really high. I have, you know, 20.4k in maximum magicka. I use like every bit of magicka on that, really, for me personally, on cloak. And so I found personally that when I ran Merciless, in like BG sometimes, I like my magicka would be a little bit strained, and that was something that I personally did not like. So I ran Relentless Focus, and that kind of solved that problem. Now, if you play the build and you're like, Dottz, my magicka sustain is personally fine, I would highly recommend switching this to Merciless Resolve because it will deal more damage. But for me personally, I had a little bit of trouble with it. It could just absolutely be a me thing. And so because of that, I am running Relentless Focus. But I would say run whichever morph of this that you want. If you're having trouble sustaining mag, run Relentless Focus. But if you can sustain the mag, no problem. Merciless Resolve will give you a little bit more damage. But just talking about the skill in general now, it's just really good. This is our main burst tool on Nightblade. You know, unfortunately, the Nightblade burst is a bit telegraphed because you are going for that in-cap, you know, Assassin's Will or Scourge burst, and with the travel time, sometimes it can be a pain in the butt to land, so you do need to be a little bit unpredictable with how you use this. But it's the main burst tool for the build that deals a ludicrous amount of damage. It's really strong. The heal is great as well, and so it's why we have this on our front bar. I run Killer's Blade. So Killer's Blade is going to be my execute of choice. So you deal 300% more damage to enemies below 25% health with Killer's Blade, and it heals you for 6,300 if the enemy dies within 2 seconds of not being struck, or within 2 seconds of being struck by this ability. So Killer's Blade, I personally like more than Executioner for a couple of reasons. Number one, this procs our assassination passives. Number two, I find the heal on this to be really valuable, especially when fighting outnumbered. Number three, I don't know if it's just me, but I have talked to a couple of friends and I don't think it is. I sometimes have these weird weaving issues with Executioner. Like sometimes I feel like the ability just like locks up my character's ability to weave, and it's kind of a pain, while Killer's Blade does not have that problem. Killer's Blade also, in my opinion, looks cooler, sounds cooler. But honestly, it's been like it's an age-old debate when it comes to Stamina Nightblade about Killer's Blade versus Executioner. Use whatever you want here. It truly doesn't matter. It's down to your personal preference. But our next skill is going to be Rally. So Rally is going to give us our source of major brutality, give us minor endurance for increased stamina recovery, and it is going to be our burst heal. So the longer that Rally is up, when we recast the skill, we get a burst heal to heal ourselves. So Rally still a very good heal for the Stamina Nightblade, and it gives us a ton of buffs through major brutality and minor endurance. So absolutely still very good to use on that two-handed bar. We do run in cap as our ultimate on the build. This is going to be our main burst ultimate. It's very cheap, which is great. It deals a lot of disease damage, and then it causes them to take 20% more damage from our attacks for 6 seconds. So this is when we're going to want to use our bow proc to maximize its damage. Now, you also, while this is slotted, gain Reeve, which restores 100 magic and stamina when you deal damage with a light or heavy attack with an enemy that has a negative effect on them, which if you're just PvPing will basically be everybody. Now, the problem with this ability is that second line, which is why I skipped it. If cast with 120 or more ultimate, the enemy is stunned for 3 seconds. I don't know what ZeniMax did to this skill, but over the last patch or two, there is this weird, awkward window where right about when the skill is going to change from in-cap that doesn't stun to in-cap that does stun, you straight up cannot use the ability. So if that is happening to you, or you know, if you've thought that that's been happening to you and you think you're going crazy, you're not. It's this really weird thing that's been going on with in-cap now for a little while. So just be aware that if your in-cap is approaching 120 ultimate and you think you're going to need it in that moment, there is a possibility that you are not going to be able to use the skill as it changes from non-stun in-cap to stun in-cap. So just be aware that that's a thing. I still do use the skill on the stamblade just because it is extremely good even with that bug. But it's just something I wanted to mention here, and something I wanted you guys just to be aware of, so that if you do notice it happening, no, it is not just you. There is something actually wrong with the skill. So I just wanted to mention that real quick. Now, going to our back bar, guys, we use Poison Injection. So Poison Injection is going to be our dot coming from the bow. It's going to be what procs the Master Bow. It is also going to give us a little bit of execute dot damage on enemies below 50% health. So main purpose, though, is simply to just act as a slight bit of consistent damage over time, but mainly to proc that Master Bow. Now, our main movement ability on the build, and the most important ability, in my opinion, for Nightblade in general, is Shadow Image. So Shadow Image, you're going to summon a shade for 20 seconds that shoots like a dot at your opponents, dealing damage every 2 seconds and also inflicting minor maim. But the most important thing is that while the shade is summoned, you can activate this ability again to teleport to the shade's location. So something to keep in mind, guys, is that I do not run shuffle on this build, and so shade will be your main source of movement. So if you are within combat here and things get hairy, the goal is to simply shade out and then cloak, and then you will be able to back off. And the good thing is that because you're a vampire with swift and celerity, you actually will move quite quickly inside of stealth. So stealth is going to be your way to escape, but your cloak placement is extremely important for this build. And if you mess up on your placement, you will notice that you do sometimes have trouble escaping situations that you would have otherwise been able to completely get out of. So very important ability for the build, very strong, allows the Nightblade to play quite irresponsibly because of how powerful it is. So easily one of my favorite abilities in the Nightblade kit. We do run Resolving Vigor on the back bar. This is going to be our stamina hot on the build, obviously, healing us over 4 seconds. Not really much else to say about it. It is the primary heal over time for the build. We use Shadowy Disguise. This is going to be our stealth. This is going to be our cloak. It also allows us to deal an automatic crit when coming out of stealth, which is incredibly strong. Going to proc our Stygian, going to proc our Vampire passive, is going to be one of our main escape tools. Procs our Shadow passive, so very, very, very good skill, obviously. I now run Leeching Strikes on the build instead of running Shuffle. Leeching Strikes has been really good because it allows me to very easily sustain Stage 3 Vampire. And I also really, really like the heal that comes from this skill. It is very noticeable to have it. So your light and heavy attacks will heal you for 1500 health, and it also restores stam. Fully charged heavy attacks will restore twice the value, and then as this ability expires, it's kind of like Rally, where the longer it's up, the more stamina it will restore. You get a shitload of sustain coming from this, and it allows me to sustain Stage 3 Vampire quite easily, and that is why I chose to run this and drop Shuffle. But to me, it's definitely worth it. You know, part of the reason I was able to justify dropping Shuffle is because as a stamblade and the way I kind of made this character, I'm not up in the fight just constantly brawling it out anyway. Like, if things get hairy, I'm going to shade out, Shadowy Disguise, and reset anyway. And so because of that, I just felt like I'd get more value out of something like Leeching Strikes to allow me to run Vampirism to not only make me more tankier via Undeath, but just give me more damage from Strike from the Shadows, and also just having the quality of life of not being slowed at all while I'm stealth. Like, Dark Stalker is such an impactful passive on the Stamblade to ignore that movement speed penalty of sneak and stealth. It's super, super, super valuable. So Leeching Strikes enabled me to do a lot, run Vampire, and gain a lot of really good passives. We do run Temporal Guard on the back bar. This is mainly slotted for the minor protection, reducing our damage taken by 5%. But if we want to, we could also step back in time, resetting our health, magic, and stamina to what they were 4 seconds ago. It's one of the few builds that I still do run Temporal Guard. I find it still quite useful for the Stamina Nightblade, giving me a little bit of extra tankiness on that back bar. We also do run a Defending Bow on the back bar, like I mentioned earlier. And so because of that, our unbuffed resistances for a build like this, 20k spell and physical with 2300 crit resist. And then we also have Temporal Guard, and then if we have our cloak up, we go up to 26k a piece. And for a build like this, that's actually really solid in the resistance department. So gives us a little bit of extra tankiness on the back bar on top of Undeath. You know, you can run a defensive ult back here if you want to. But personally, for me, with the Stamblade, I find myself going into in-cap just basically all the time anyway. And so Temporal Guard for me as a back bar ultimate just made a lot of sense. Now, guys, going into our stats here, we are running 11 into health and 53 into stamina to get me over 30k maximum health, which I think is a very important breakpoint this patch. We have 20.4k maximum mag with 28k maximum stam, 1800 stamina recovery with 792 magic recovery with about 4500 unbuffed weapon damage. We have 30% crit with 6500 unbuffed pen, but do not forget we have the Sundered status effects giving us penetration, and we also have Stuns giving us penetration. We have 17k spell and physical resistance on the front bar, going up to 20k on the back bar with about 2400 critical resistance. And then we run Vampire Stage 3, like I mentioned earlier, for the benefits that I have mentioned. Bewitched Sugar Skulls as our buff food for increase to our maximum health, magic, and stamina. And then I also do run the Serpent Mundus for increased stamina recovery. Now, in terms of race, I personally run the Khajiit. Khajiit, I think, is really good for Stamblade just because you get a lot of really solid bonuses. You get increased... The health recovery is completely useless, but you do get increases to your stamina and magic recovery. You do get increases to all tri-stats, which is very, very good, of course. And then you also get critical damage and critical healing increase. And for a build like this that has very solid crit ratings on top of automatically critting out of stealth, it's going to be a lot of effective damage. But I'm not going to lie, guys, one of the main reasons that I do run Khajiit is because this guy is also my Magblade, and so Khajiit can flex really well between the two different specs. Now, if you want to, you can run Stamblade as a variety of races. You can run it as Khajiit, you can run it as Dark Elf, you can run it as Imperial, you can run it as Wood Elf. You're going to just need to kind of adjust your sustain numbers and maybe your stats a little bit, kind of based on the race that you choose. But for me, I built this raid about I made this build about being a Khajiit. So if you do choose Khajiit, these were going to be the stats that you want to go with. But obviously, if you're going to go with Imperial, you don't have to put as many points into health. If you're going to go with Dunmer, maybe you can run more points into health with less triglyphs because you have more stats to work with. If you go with Wood Elf, you can, adjust the sustain. So obviously, you're going to have to make some adjustments for different races, but just wanted to mention it here. Now, for potions, guys, I do run just simply tri-stat pots, giving me increases to health, magicka, and stamina, and giving me all three major recovery bonuses. Now, moving into our champion points here, guys, we do have Duelist Rebuff for single target damage reduction. I also do run Resilience for extra critical resistance to just make me a little bit tankier. And then I also run Ironclad for 10% damage reduction against direct damage. Now, you might be wondering, Dottz, why do you run 3 defensive CP? This is the only build that I have that I run 3 defensive CP and CP PvP. And that is just simply because almost every single thing in this build is dedicated towards offense. This is an extremely offensive build. And so because of that, I personally feel like I'd rather get the tankiness that comes from the CP as opposed to going for just pure offense. Now, if you go Dottz, I don't know, the tankiness in the build feels a little bit high to me. What I would recommend doing is actually leaving Resilience and Ironclad, taking out Duelist Rebuff, and instead placing it in Master at Arms. So I will leave that, guys, up to you, whether or not you want to go 3 defensive and 1 offensive or 2 and 2. But if you do decide to go 2 and 2, take the points out of Duelist Rebuff, place them in Master at Arms, and your damage is going to absolutely skyrocket. And then we also do have Deadly Aim for single target damage increase. On the red CP side, guys, we have 1400 maximum health coming from Boundless Vitality. I actually run the 90 recovery out of Rejuvenation as opposed to Sustained by Suffering, just because, again, the Nightblade does play very like bob and weave. You go in, you go out, you go in, you go out. And so because of that, there might be times where you don't have a negative status effect on you and you're going to want that extra recovery. And so because of that, I do run Rejuvenation. And then I also run Relentlessness for the major protection after being CC'd. And then we also run Celerity for the increased movement speed, which is very useful because we do not run a gap closer. But like I said, guys, I do just want to impress upon you before we move on to the rotation that this CP, the Duelist Rebuff CP, is very flex. So obviously change and adjust this as is your preference, whether or not you want to be tankier or deal more damage with Master at Arms. Now, guys, moving into our rotation here, the rotation for Stamblade, you're going to basically be wanting to maintain up at all times Shadow Image and Leeching Strikes on yourself, as well as Rally and Relentless Focus. On your opponent, you're going to want to maintain Poison Injection because of your Master Bow. And then your strategy at that point is going to simply be to go into stealth, walk up to your opponent, smack them with Surprise Attack from a flank to proc your Vampire passives, your Stygian, your Stuns, and your Camo Hunter. And then you're just going to light attack, surprise attack until, you get the bow. Then you're going to go into incap and then fire the bow. And then as they get low, swap to Killer's Blade. The tough part when it comes to Stamblade is really not the offensive part. Stamblade just deals a lot of damage. So honestly, staying offensive on Stamblade really isn't the craziest thing in the world. You just deal so much damage. The challenge for Stamina Nightblade is learning how to survive. And in my opinion, that is really reliant on properly learning how to use Shadow Image. So if you're fighting someone, don't just play Shadow Image like let's say you're fighting in a tower, right? Don't just place Shadow Image in a really obvious location. Place it in a with some verticality so that you can change floors. Place it behind a tree so you get some LOS, behind a wall. Place it on the other side of a doorway. You be smart about where you place your shade, and then make a mental note of where you place it so that you, number one, don't run too far away from it, but number 2, know where you're going to be teleporting to when you do actually use the port. But proper use of shade and learning really how to use it and practicing with it is going to unlock your survivability on the Stamblade, and then as well as kind of limit testing and knowing, okay, now it's my time to back out, use the shade, run away, and then that's how you'll know, when it's a good enough time to back out. But that's just going to really come with practice and playing the build. But I think with this, guys, you're going to be really well equipped for success, and you should learn in time how to properly play that stamblade. But hopefully you guys did enjoy the build and did like the setup, and if you did, I would appreciate it if you smacked a like on the video. If you guys have any questions or comments about the build, feel free to leave them below. The comments as well as the likes help me a lot in the YouTube algorithm, so I really would appreciate it if you drop those on the video. And if you guys want to see more ESO Ascending Tide PvP builds, please hit that sub button as well as the bell to keep those notifications on. So thank you all so much for stopping by today. I do very much appreciate it. As always, I'm Dottz Gaming, and I'll see you all in the next video.